if you do all of this well, and you get into the recruiter's mind, the next most important thing that you need to crack is the interview process, right? And we'll spend the next 10-15 minutes and bulk of our time today on discussing this, which will address a lot of your questions and how to get ready for a PM role as well, right? So, and this is a broad slate in terms of what you get evaluated for during an interview process. Obviously, the process varies slightly here and there based on the company you're getting evaluated for and all of that. So typically you have three kind of things that you get evaluated for. First is the set of competencies that you get checked for. Those are the hard skills that you need to develop to succeed in a PM role. The second is the leadership skills, which you need to kind of use on a day-to-day basis to influence stakeholders and to succeed in that role. The third is just the attitude aspects of you as a person and kind of how you operate in a day-to-day life, right? We'll talk about each of these in sequence. So typically, when you talk about competency checks, right, like a lot of companies start with doing a basic screening first, right? Either they take you through an exploratory round discussion where they talk about your current experience, why you're interested in a PM role, how you showcase those skills in your current work experience, all of that. Alternatively, some companies also give you a case study to work on. They give you a problem statement. For example, let's say you're working in an EdTech company and you see that children are not engaging enough. They watch a video for 10 minutes and drop off. They don't engage with the video completely to the end. How would you drive engagement? How do you keep children motivated while watching learning videos, right? That could be a problem statement that you get with, right? And you're expected to kind of build a case study around it, like how you look at that problem. How do you, if you are a PM, how would you solve that problem? What kind of solutions would you propose? What kind of metrics would you propose to evaluate success of your solutions? All of that, right? So typically, companies do a screening round where you either get a exploratory interview done or a kind of case study which you need to build and submit. After which you go through a set of 3-4 rounds. One of those rounds happens to be, for example, problem solving or execution, right? Like, and we'll talk about some of these in details. Problem solving, the focus is evaluating your structuring skills, your metrics understanding, all of that. Then you go through a product thinking round where you typically where the customers at and try to build something out and see how it performs on the real world marketplace. The next is having a tech understanding where you basically and problem solving and product thinking rounds are typically done by other PMs in the company. Tech understanding or system understanding is a round which is typically taken by the engineering team, and their motive is to understand would they be comfortable working with you, can you understand what they are trying to communicate to you and all of that, and then it follows with a business round. Again, this is optional. Not all companies kind of do a business round. Here, you'll again be working with business stakeholders, either marketing stakeholders or growth stakeholders to, and the objective of this discussion is, again, can you understand business metrics? Can you understand what they are trying to achieve in the next 3 months, 6 months? And can you help them achieve those goals, right? Those are the kind of aspects. Now, the initial case study or the screening round and the business sense round are optional. Some companies do it, some companies do not do it. But 2, 3, 4 are generally like mandatory in every company that you interview with. The second key track is the leadership skills, right? And typically, because it's a product management role where you need a lot of influencing skills, you need alignment with a lot of other stakeholders. People want to understand how you go about influencing stakeholders and how you go about managing conflicts. On a day-to-day basis, a product manager, you'll be in situations where your stakeholder is not aligned with what you are proposing. They have a different point of view, or they look at data in a different way from you do, or whatever idea you are proposing, they are not convinced if that makes sense or that will be impactful. So how do you resolve those conflicts? How do you go about influencing them and selling your idea? And if at all, if you're not able to convince them, are you open to disagree and commit and kind of move forward with whatever the suggestion is? That becomes important, right? And it's important to manage relationships and maintain positive relations with stakeholders, because you will always be working with them on a longer term basis, right? So you cannot have rough feathers with them. And as you develop as a PM, you also need to build a product strategy, build a longer term vision for your product. You need to showcase that vision to leadership, fight for getting more bandwidth like today, let's say you have 5 engineers and the vision or the roadmap that you put in place needs 10 developers or 10 engineers to work with you. How do you convince your leadership to give more resources to you? How do you make them kind of rally behind you? That's where being a better communicator, being a better storyteller becomes important. And while you go through the interview process, subconsciously, every interviewer is also trying to gauge you on how open you are to these things and how you manage all of these situations during your day-to-day life, right? And the third bit is attitude checks, right? Like where I think the first and foremost thing is ownership, right? As a PM, you are on the driver's seat, right? And you're expected to drive things. You are not supposed to, there's no one who is going to come to you and tell you, do this, or whatever, right? And obviously, as you're getting started as a PM in your first role as a PM or an entry level PM, there will be people who are mentoring you or guiding you. But over time, you're supposed to lead the way and you're supposed to drive things, right? So it's important for you to show that ownership skills and proactiveness to go all out and solve things, and not just like stop at identifying problems, but also find solutions to whatever problems you face, right? Like not just problems in the product, but problems in your day-to-day life as well. The second thing is having that curiosity and being open to learning, right? Like as a PM, you are supposed to be a jack of all trades, right? You need to know design, you need to know engineering, you need to know sales, you need to understand business. And a lot of things will not be known to you in the beginning. So you have to be very open in your mind, and you have to kind of be open to absorbing as much as knowledge and information keeps coming to you, and keep learning. And it can be overwhelming at some times, but it is important for you to have that open mind and also put in the effort to keep learning over time, right? And the third thing is resilience and persistence, right? I think, like we mentioned, you'll always be in situations where your stakeholders are not convinced, right? And you feel that I've tried to convince them twice, but they're still not convinced. Should I give up, right? But it doesn't work that way, right? And as companies get bigger, and there will be more dependencies, right? In order to ship one product, you'll have to work with maybe not just 5, but 10, 15 different cross functions, right? The bigger the company, more the dependencies and more the stakeholders that you need to work with, and more the effort that you need to put in to convince them and align with your vision and roadmap, right? And that's where you need to be very persistent, keep repeating, keep doing the same things over and over again, and not giving up and trying to get your stuff done, right? So that's what you need to showcase resilience, right? So during your interview process, people will try to push you as much as possible, and the intent is not to. Sometimes candidates feel that when they're like, let's say they're being asked a question and they come up with 5 different answers, and the interviewer asks them, let's say these 5 are not enough, like can you come up with 3 more answers or whatever, right? Sometimes candidates feel that probably the interviewer has some specified answer in mind, is just looking to hear that answer out, but that's not the case. People are just trying to push you to the extreme and try to get more out of you, and see how you perform in kind of a situation where all doors are closed and you don't have any other doors open, right? So I think a lot of these checks also are try to evaluate you on the attitude. Now we'll go into the 3 things that we talked about, right? The 3 core competencies: problem solving, product thinking, and tech understanding. We'll cover each of these one by one quickly. We'll talk about what the expectations are and what kind of sample questions that you receive. Now, before we get into that, because I'm from Flipkart, I can give you a quick snapshot of how the Flipkart interview process also looks like. So typically it starts with an exploratory discussion or a case study, like we said, which is a screening round. Then you follow it up with 3 discussions around problem solving, product thinking, and business understanding. Then we have a tech understanding round, and the last is a hiring manager discussion, where hiring manager basically evaluates you for fitment with the role, what kind of domain you've come from, how well can you adjust to the current domain, what kind of work culture that you come from, can you adjust here, are you open to learning, feedback, all of that. Now, if you're an APM who is being hired from campus, you typically get evaluated for 1, 2, 3. If you're a PM who is getting hired from campus, you additionally get interviewed for 4. And if you're someone who is getting hired laterally, then you also get evaluated for 5. And hiring manager is a round which is common to everyone who tries to get into a PM role at Flipkart. So now, like quickly going into each of these competency rounds, right? Like the first is problem solving. I think, like I mentioned earlier, the primary focus is to understand, can you structure a problem? Can you formulate hypothesis, right? Where you need to be able to explore the breadth and depth both of the problem, And do you have a sound understanding of the metrics? And there are typically 3 to 4 different type of questions that you get asked, right? The most frequent question is some kind of an RCA question or a diagnosing a problem, right? Where you say, let's say, the cancellations, right? Cancellations for Uber are increasing, and can you build your hypothesis as to why this might be happening and how do you address that? That can be a question. The other kind of question that you see is like you being asked, if you are a PM at TikTok, what are the kind of metrics that you would instrument? How do you evaluate the success? How is TikTok doing? Is it on the right track or not? You might also get guesstimate oriented questions, like let's say Google Play Store. There are people download apps from Google Play Store. If you are at a PM at Google, how would you estimate the kind of revenue or the annual sales that Google Play Store makes? How do you come up with that estimate, right? So where you have to break down the problem, like what are the different revenue streams of Google Play Store? And break down the problem further, like there is probably, let's say, commission is the revenue model, right? Then I have to think about how many downloads are happening, what is the typical commission per download, what is the percentage of apps which offer you are paid apps and not free apps. You have to decompose revenue equation into multiple different things, do a bottoms up estimate and come up with that eventual number. You also get asked about market entry based questions, like for example, should WhatsApp get into e-commerce? Those are questions that you also get asked, right? So and at entry levels, primarily you get asked questions on 1 or 2. As you graduate up and you're being hired for more senior roles, you can get asked for 3 and 4 as well. Now the second core competency is product thinking round, where the focus is, again, structured approach is common both in problem solving and product thinking, because I think that's a bare minimum, right? For you being able to break down the problem and look at different aspects of its mandatory. There's no 2 ways about it. But the additional things that you also need to get evaluated for is can you understand the customer? Like, can you dig deeper? Can you be in the customer's shoes? Understand what his real motivations are? A lot of times people fail at this, right? People assume that their problems are customers' problem. But it's also important to be in the customer suits and think firsthand, right? You also get to showcase your prioritizing skills. How would you prioritize different problems? What problem is important for you to solve in the next 3 months? What should you not solve in the next 1 year? You also get evaluated for do you solve problems using technology or not? And can you evaluate the different risks that come with using a particular solution? Those are typically things that you get evaluated for, right? And the kind of questions that you get asked, many times people ask you, what is your favorite product, like which you use on a day-to-day basis, and then lead that with certain questions. When let's say you name Google Photos as the favorite product, then people will ask you, if you're a PM at Google Photos, how would you build it? What are the features you would develop next? How would you build a roadmap for it? Or they might give you a very pointed question about building a certain product feature or improving a certain product, like how to build a polling feature for WhatsApp. WhatsApp doesn't have a polling feature today, right? So how do you go about building it? Or how do you design a refrigerator for kids? So there are design oriented questions or product improvement questions that you get generally asked for. The third competency which we talked about is the tech understanding, right? Here, I think again addressing the general question that we get, you don't need to understand coding. You're not asked to code, or you're not asked to write algorithms. You're never asked to do that. But the expectation is that you need to understand basic terminologies. Like, for example, if you're working on a web product, you understand what a domain is. You understand what an API is. And it's easy to learn some of these from the social media today, right? Like develop a basic understanding of these nuances, which will help you converse easily. It's like a language, right? Where if you know English, it will be easier to communicate with people who know English. Similarly, if you know these terms, it will be easy for you to communicate with engineers and work more effectively on a day-to-day basis. The second most important thing is, can you think long-term? Don't solve in a hackish way or for the immediate use case that you have in hand. Can you think 2 years down the line? Can you think what are the engineering capabilities I need to build to enable business in the next 2 years and build accordingly, right? I think those are the typical things that you get evaluated for. Most 90% of the times you get asked about your past experience of working with engineers, what kind of challenges you faced, how did you go about resolving those challenges, what are the learning that you had. But sometimes you also get asked about building certain products. If you have to, let's say, build a parking reservation system, how do you build it from a tech standpoint? What are the different components? Like, you'll have to think For example, is it a upfront parking? Do I have to reserve a park, or do I do a real-time parking? What kind of do I have to pay online or do I have to pay offline? So what are the different systems I need to build to enable this product to work, right? So these are some of the kind of questions that you typically get asked for. Now, I know we are running sort of time, so I'll just take 5 more minutes and kind of address some of the things that I've observed over time, right? Like the first thing is what are the kind of typical mistakes that people do while going through the interview process, or also while working as a PM in a company, right? The first and foremost I see is people being very solution oriented, right? Like where uh, a lot of PMs or a lot of people tend to think that idea generation is same as product management. Like if I generate hundreds of ideas, or I'm more innovative, or I'm more creative, then I'm a better PM. And that leads to them tending to jump into solutions. When in an interview scenario, people are asked a question, the flush of energy kind of the rush of energy makes them jump into solutions and propose 3 or 4 ideas, right? It's important to take the step back and kind of be problem focused. Ask more whys, try to uncover the problem as much as possible. Try to ask clarifying questions to the interviewer. Try to understand the problems because ideas can come from anywhere. Solutions can come from anywhere. As if you understand the problem well, you'll also be able to solve it well. The second part is people make a lot of assumptions, right? Like and we tend to rely on the first instinct that comes to our mind, and a lot of times that is not correct. And I'm talking from experience here. And because a lot of our biases, a lot of our experiences, beliefs we've had in the past shape our assumptions. Like, for example, let's say you're asked a question, how do you build a bookshelf for kids, right? And the assumption that we automatically make in our mind is we are talking about how do a physical bookshelf, right? But today we are in a world where people read books online as well. So can it be a digital bookshelf? So that's an assumption we made initially, ki it's a physical bookshelf. So how do you question your beliefs? How do you take a step back, think consciously, and wherever required, kind of ask the interviewer and clarify your assumptions, or state them explicitly that this is an assumption I'm making. Is it fair enough to go ahead, or should I look at some other aspects as well? So try to be as explicit and as possible, right? The third thing is not having a good decision making framework, right? A lot of times, like when people are asked about how do you prioritize between these 5 problems, what would you pick, what would you not pick, people go by gut. People say that I'll pick 2, and when they're questioned, why did you pick 2? Why do you think you should not do 3, or you should not do 4? They're not able to justify their decision. Or when they think about corner cases, you haven't thought it through, right? So it's important to also create a framework, right? While in the interview process, and don't be bookish here. No need to be bookish here. You need to first kind of establish what is the set of criteria using which I'll make a decision, and use it very objectively to arrive at a decision, right? These are some suggestions or kind of things that people should do to perform better as a PM.